Welcome back. Thanks for bearing with us. So we're going to split off into a family-focused track for the afternoon, where we spend a little time talking about how to deal and cope with some of the emotional strain that comes with dealing with a child with severe special needs like GNAO1. So joining us this afternoon is Laurisa Ballew. She's a nurse by trade and mother of a special needs child, and she believes that hope and grief walk hand in hand in life, and that storytelling is a universal language that can connect all of us. She has 3 daughters and writes about the constant humility of parenting in her blog, Raising a Sisterhood. Laurisa has spoken through organizations such as the United Way and Children's Mercy Hospital, and this year she won Volunteer of the Year Award for the Tubular Sclerosis Alliance. So welcome. Thanks very much for being here today.
Thank you. Okay, who's excited to talk about grief? Yeah. When I was asking the girls that contacted me about speaking what you guys wanted to hear about, they said self-care. And that's exciting to me. I think that self-care is a very it term, and wellness is probably a better word for what we're actually looking for. And I actually believe that grieving the life that you thought you were going to have is the first step in wellness. And so that's what I'm going to talk to you about today. There's a couple reasons I think that we are hesitant to grieve. And one is that the typical grief cycle looks like this over here. And this, at least for me, is about 24 hours in my life. You know, I wake up and I'm like, this is going to be a great day. I'm ready to go if I slept, or else I'm, still awake. And then, the first thing happens. My child didn't sleep well, and that throws her all off, and then I'm dealing with that, or whatever it is. And then usually anger, I wish I had a little light. There's anger here, over here. That's usually after I talk to the insurance company about something. Anyone else? Yes, okay. That's about the time I hit anger. And then I usually end the day at some point either with a glass of wine, just thanking high heavens that my kids are asleep, or on a real high note, your kid has done something they haven't done before, and you're thinking, this is the best life. I live the best life, and and so this is just truly what a day can look like. And so it's hard to say, hey, you know what, guys, I'm going to step into my grief and I'm going to deal with it, because it feels a little bit like we don't have any control. And so who wants to go down that dark rabbit hole? And so we avoid it. And I have a couple other reasons we're going to touch on, but before we go any further, one of my core beliefs in life is that joy and pain, or joy and grief, walk hand in hand in life. They are not able to be separated. They're Siamese twins, and they just go solely together. And there's an author, Anne Voskamp, and she has this quote that says, joy and pain, or grief for our purposes, they're about 2 arteries of one heart that pumps through all of those who don't numb themselves to really living. And that is what you guys are asking for in wellness or in self-care, is to not be numb and to truly live. Okay, so a little bit about my family. So this is my daughter, Emmaus. She is 7 years old. And then my little 2 Shilohs in the middle and Lennon's on the edge. Emmaus is 7 years old, and she has a rare genetic disease called tuberous sclerosis complex, not nearly as rare as GNAO1, but still falls on the same scale. So TSC allows her tumor inhibitor gene does not work well, and parts of it are just plain missing. And so tumors grow in all the organs of her central nervous system. So she has dozens upon dozens of brain tumors. She has heart tumors. She has kidney tumors, an eye tumor. And as she develops, we would expect to see tumors grow in her lungs, in the ventricles of her brain, in her liver, in her ovaries, all of it, basically. At 8 weeks old, she had her first seizure, and she seized pretty relentlessly until she was about 17 months old. We failed a handful of meds and then headed down the surgery route. And so she had, when she was 17 months old, a tumor the size of a golf ball removed from her left frontal lobe. And thankfully, that stopped her seizing for 17 months after that. It was a great time for her. She learned to sit, She learned to walk during that time. She said her first word after that. However, while these tumors are benign, even with the epilepsy stopping, it is not a benign disease. It has continued to wreak havoc on our lives. So she was diagnosed with autism at age 3. TS is the leading genetic disease that carries autism with it. About 60% of kids also have autism. And then right before her 5th birthday, she developed a pneumonia and almost died. And that is when my journey with wellness really started. But from the time she was born, I did what I thought all good parents in my shoes would do. I put my head down. I focused on all the information I could get. I tried to make the very best decisions for her, and I compared my grief away. So a friend of mine, an acquaintance really from college, she lost her son about 6 months before Emmaus was born. He had a congenital defect. He was not going to live after birth, and I watched, along with the rest of her Facebook friends and her blog following, as they very bravely walked through having him and him not surviving. And so the first question I asked when I found out Emmaus would have TS is, will she live? And the answer was yes. And so from that minute, Terry became my worst case scenario. And I compared everything to that. So when the sadness would rise in me, I thought, but she's alive. Yeah. When the heartbreak of all of my kids' friends doing things so easily and that not being my story, I thought, but she's alive. And so every time I felt that sadness rise up, I just stuffed it. And that's not a surprise, because I think culturally we are taught to compare. And we're taught to stuff. I mean, we are good stuffers in this country. So here's an example of, I think, how we are culturally taught to compare. I'm sure you all have heard the phrase, comparison is the thief of joy. Well, if my theory holds true, and joy and grief walk together, that would make comparison also the thief of grief, which, like I've already said, I believe is fundamental to us being well. So have you ever said to your children, or had said to you, eat your dinner and stop complaining because there are starving children in China? Yeah. Or, I don't know about you guys, but if you have small children like me, most of my really great parenting moments happen inside of a really great store called Target, where I spend like a third of my week. And it's always in the toy aisle. We've already prepped. We're not buying any toys. We have a million toys at home. We're not buying anything. And inevitably, there's always a meltdown about whatever toy that they just have to have, and I'm terrible because they can't have it. And I find myself going to, stop complaining. There are kids that have nothing. And truly what we're trying to do is give perspective. But perspective, I think, is something that's learned through your own life experiences. And what we actually are doing is saying, hey, if you don't have the worst case scenario, zip it. If your feelings aren't valid because you don't have the worst case scenario. Now, I'm not saying this to shame you if you say this to your children. I'm just saying that I think culturally this is something that we are taught. And so this is what we do with our grief. We say, well, hey, I'm over here, and my friend has it way worse over here, so instead I'm just going to stuff it in this box. And what happens with this box is you take that feeling and you stuff it, and then you move on throughout your day or your week or your life, and then you have another one and you come back and stuff it, and before you know it, this box is overflowing. And the problem with grief is that the more you neglect it, the more of it you have, and the more present it is in your life. And then what ends up happening is you're doing this acrobat act where you have to keep a hand on the box, even though you're trying to ignore it. You know, it's so present, and it's ruling everything, and you have foot up in the air, and then some lady in the grocery store says that you're really strong, and that's why you have this child, and you're just lucky you're in public because you probably would have thrown a punch her. You're right, you know? I mean, no, I'm not strong. I'm just a mom. This is what I have to do for my child. And actually, I didn't sleep at all, and my grief box is so full, and so I cannot have grace for your lack of sensitivity. And this is what ends up happening. It oozes out in bitterness and anger. And so often it oozes out at the people we love the most. My mom is here. She would agree to this thing. Because it turns into anything someone says to you suddenly is super personal because you haven't slept in weeks and you've talked to more insurance people than you would ever like to in your life. And you haven't dealt with this grief. So, you might wonder how I got from this being constant in my life, this oozing, to really feeling like I'm in a place of wellness. And it was actually Terry who gave me that permission. So, about the time Emmaus was supposed to go to kindergarten, I reached out to Terry and I said, hey, I just want you to know I haven't forgotten you and I haven't forgotten your son. And with these big milestones happen, and I feel grief because I just thought maybe we'd be caught up by kindergarten, or I just thought maybe this isn't what we'd be doing. I think of you, and I just want you to know you're not forgotten. And her response to me was, thank you. But then also, Laurisa, I think of you, and I don't know how you're doing what you're doing. I know you're doing it, but it's because it's what you have to do. But you carry your grief with you in your living, breathing child. And while I had this huge catalyst for my grief and I thought I would never stand again, what ended up happening was over time I stood up and then I slowly walked forward, and now that grief is behind me. And it's still present and it's still real and it will never be forgotten. But you carry this child with you everywhere. So every day you have that pain point. And it took me a while to digest it. I cried immediately. But my first thought was, she thinks I have it worse. Like this whole time I was thinking, oh, at least I'm not the worst case scenario. It turns out I might be. I don't know. But the truth is she wasn't comparing. Because they're not comparable. Just like when my best friend's daughter got ear tubes and she was thoroughly distraught about it. And I'm thinking, my kid had brain surgery. But the truth is, if you've ever had a kid get ear tubes, is that still hard? It's still hard. And that, just because my heart is different than her heart, doesn't make her heart any less valid. And so what Terry telling me this did for me was it meant that I could start validating my heart. And I didn't start with this box because that felt so daunting. But it meant when I got off the phone with an insurance agent, instead of thinking, oh, thank heavens I have a child to advocate for, I thought, this is really terrible, and I hope they don't have to do that again soon. And it didn't make me any more weak, and it didn't make me fall apart. It just made me validate. And I just started with that step of saying, this is hard, and it stinks. And then, after I could validate my hard and felt permission, I gave myself permission to feel that this life is hard. It meant I could start asking for this magical 4-letter word, help. Because I felt like I was valid in my heart, and so it was fair for me to ask for help. And so I started asking for help. I asked my parents for help. I asked my friends for help. I asked everyone for help because, hey, I would help you, and I need to let you help me. And so I was blessed with friends that we called them Third Thursdays, one of my friends, and she just said, what would help you? And I said, can you come over one evening a month and just, I don't know, do something at my house, like be there so I don't want to strangle my kids right before bedtime, and also just clean my kitchen that night? She's like, I would love to do that. I mean, it's such a simple thing, but asking, and I had to give myself permission to ask. And people will say no sometimes, and that's okay. You just move on. But this is what it has done. So, just like a tree, joy is the top part that's pretty and gives shade and has room and has capacity. And these roots are the hard and the grief. And we have to tend to the roots if the tree is going to grow and have capacity to do anything but survive. If the tree is going to thrive, the roots have to be well tended to. And so we have to start doing that slowly. And it doesn't have, it looks different for everyone. I'm not going to tell you how to start tending to your grief, because for you, that's going to look much different than it looked for me. For me, it involved a great counselor. It involved time, a few hours every week that I had to myself, that my husband was able to provide for me. And it was my counselor that taught me you can grieve without falling apart, and that's exactly, I guess, what I've done. It still comes up every day. Every day, my grief cycle still looks like that first one, but it's that once I've been to this other side of abundance, when the grief pulls me back over here to this place, I know how to get back over here. I'm not just merely surviving anymore. So what I really want to challenge you guys with is this. As you move on to your next session, and you are talking about wellness and self-care, all those self-care activities you can do, they have to be able to launch you into a place of abundance, and I think it starts here. So if you are reviewing and you think, I don't know that I've dealt with this grief, or I don't know, those bitterness things, that is how I know where I'm at. If those oozing moments come up a lot, I think, I probably need to do a little check here, because that is, for me, the telltale sign of it. So as you move on to your next session, and you guys are talking about some of those things, I want to really encourage you to think, where am I on this process? And be really honest with yourself. And give yourself permission to start walking forward and to grieve, because the truth is, this life is really cool. Like, listening to these researchers, it gave me so much hope for this community. And there's a lot of work to be done, but it is a beautiful life. It's a hard one, and that's okay. You get to see a different side of joy when you really have done hard. And so I guess that's my challenge, is that you guys would take a little time and decide where you are in this. I would love to chat with any of you. Feel free to reach out to me. But yeah, so thank you for inviting me.